SpectreVision Radio. SpectreVision Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher.
I found myself back in my bedroom, standing at the side of the bed, looking at my body and my wife sleeping in the bed.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. I'm Jo Hickey Hall and I'm joined today by Dr. Vic Shane. And Vic, welcome. I've been reading your book that you very kindly sent to me. And you initially contacted me about your experiences with what you described as being sort of similar to the dark man or dark entities. And I'm just really interested in your story, and having read your book, we've got lots to talk about. So welcome.
Hi. I guess just for some background, without getting too much into what I do for a living, which is mind-body healthcare. If I go back in time to about age 5 or 6, I started having out-of-body experiences, and they've continued to this day. And along the way, there are a lot of interesting experiences I've had. But this idea of the dark man really struck me watching one of your podcasts. And I think the dark man or dark entity is not one being necessarily. So when I was a child, I first encountered, I would say, some negative entities. And I think that this is probably common to childhood, where you see something in the closet and your parents come in, they say there's nothing there, and you can swear that there is. And so, but you do get a feeling that there's something there. And so perhaps I got a little bit of inkling about that when I was a child. But if I move further ahead to about when I was 12 years old, I had a very interesting out-of-body experience of going to this place that looked like, I would say, Moorish Spain in the 1200s. And I met with a Sufi master. And the way that this worked was I was sleeping in bed with my dog. And I suddenly was feeling I was going to leave my body. It was a familiar feeling by that time. And I separated from my body, and these two men dressed in robes, it looked like Arabic robes, came in, and they took me under my arms and lifted me through the ceiling of the house and over the rooftops of Miami, Florida, where I was from. And probably we traveled over the neighborhood for maybe less than a minute, and then suddenly I was in Moorish Spain and lowered into a tower. And then the two men receded against the walls of the tower, and I was standing in the middle just waiting. And I had no idea why I was there. And then suddenly what I would say is a Sufi master appeared, and he told me something about my future, which is basically the trajectory of what my life would be. And that was very significant just in terms of seeing where everything was going, even though I guess I wasn't really ready for the message until decades later. And From there, I had other significant things that happened as I was traveling out of my body. Uh, After we had just had our son, my wife and I I'm guessing he was about 5 or 6 months old. And at this time, or by this time, I was always traveling out of my body. It was happening once a night. And I could do it on purpose. I knew when the feeling was coming, and then I would leave my body. Generally, it was very mundane. And I would travel around the house or the apartment, wherever we were living, just to check it out, make sure everything's okay. At this point, when my son was about, I'm guessing maybe 5 months, just old enough to stand by using the edge of the crib, he was screaming, crying, and I automatically left my body and went into his bedroom. And I saw a dark force entity, and it was a vicious kind. And I knew he was there to take my son. And I had no experience with this really, and I didn't know what to do. And I started to wrestle him, and I grabbed him around the arms, and he grabbed me around the arms. And I was saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but I can't afford to lose this fight. And at this point in my life, I was a very avid weightlifter. I was probably about 40 pounds heavier than I am now. I was in my late 20s. And so the only thing I could think of is to try to like increase the size of my body so this being couldn't hold on to me. And it was sort of like a superpower I discovered by using my mind. So he tried to do the same thing, and then I ramped it up a little, and I was able to get him out of the bedroom. And we wrestled, and we went through the front window of the apartment, and I threw him over the balcony. And that was the end of that. It was a very terrifying experience, um, but it worked out okay in the long run. So 3 years later, my daughter was the same age as my son was when this happened. And the same thing happened. I was traveling. We were living in a house by this point. I traveled out of my body, went into her room, and she was also crying in her bed, her crib. And dark entity was coming to get her. So once again, I fought with it, and won. And so I realized that these beings exist. You hear other people talk about it, dark forces, demons, whatever it is. I'm not really sure. I can't say what it is. And I know that they take different forms. I have seen them as like a dark, wispy, um, amorphous sort of a being. You get a feeling from it like it's not good, it's negative. And I've also seen it more as a formed being, like the two that I fought. So from there, um, time passes along. And by my 30s, I started to read a lot of books on past life experiences and out of body experiences. And my goal was to be able to purposefully go out of my body at will. And so I kept practicing it. And almost every night I was having an out of body experience until I could just do it when I wanted to. And from there, the experiences just exploded, just seeing all kinds of things, seeing when my father's father, my grandfather, died. I went out of my body in the living room, and he was standing there wearing a suit and a cane. And he took me by surprise. I said, "What are you doing here?" And apparently he had died, and he had that look like, I don't know where I'm supposed to be. But I didn't have the wherewithal to say, okay, you've passed that along. You need to go into the light or whatever it is you need to do. But instead, I was just surprised and said, "What are you doing here?" Um, so I don't know how much further you want me to go into this, or I'm moving along rather rapidly. So
Thank
I
you.
don't know, maybe your feedback.
Thank you very much. Um, well, I mean, I've got a few questions because you talk about as a child, this is something, this kind of ability to leave the body you had been experiencing since early childhood.
Mhm.
And something that you said in the book really kind of chimed with me, which was about, looking out at the world through these two eyes, as if you were looking out through a camera lens. And
Right.
and that really, I could really kind of relate to that. Could you tell us kind of what that was like as a child, when your experience of the world, an experience of self, I guess, and then how it came about? Do you remember the first time or one of the early
I
times?
do remember. I
Mm,
do remember my mother was dropping me off at kindergarten for the first time,
mm,
and I was standing outside with her, and I could see the door of the school, and to the left was a playground. And I was standing there looking at everything, and I had the sense of, like you said, just looking out of these two orbits at the world and knowing that I was something behind it and not in the world. The body, of course, is in the world, but I knew that I was something behind it, something not of it. And it was very surreal in that I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I belonged in this world. I didn't understand what people were doing. They were so wrapped up with what they were, children were wrapped up in playing. And it was so surreal, like illusory, I would say. And again, I think that feeling has never left me. It's always been that way. I still look at the world and just say, what's going on out there? It doesn't make any sense to me. All the good and the bad, the terrible, the awful suffering and happiness, and I never really got into, um, I would say, the things of this world. Of course, I've enjoyed many things, but I can just see it as fleeting, and I'm not in it. It's in me in a way, I would say. And so that perspective, I think, is well. I know that it's also permeated all the out of body experiences. And I would also say that eventually there's this arc in my life where eventually I came to realize that um, reality is metaphorically out there, but that reality is an illusion. It's temporary. Things come and go. People are unaware of what they're doing. But the real reality is back here. And again, it's metaphorically, it's not spatial. Um, it's back where this awareness begins. So, with that in mind, this sort of helped me deal with these dark force entities, where in my life as an adult, I encountered a dark force entity more I would say it's almost in a liminal state between the physical and the non physical, where I would be in bed and I would look out into the room as I did as a child, and I would see something in the room. It's a dark entity. Um, at one point, I was looking, and this being was sort of peering around the door to the bedroom, and I could see red eyes, and I looked at it, and it was looking at me, and it always has ill intent. And the difference between this and the previous experiences is that I learned more of what I am to deal with it. I don't know if that makes sense to you. So, this idea of what I am goes back to what I was saying a minute ago, where there's something that's back in here and it's not in that world. And I had this full realization at one point, maybe about 10 years ago, that what I am is the totality of everything. And that never changes. That's not something that can be injured or changed or destroyed. And so when I began seeing these dark entities from that perspective, I would say, you can come at me if you want, but there's nothing you can do to me because I'm you and you're me. So what that did was it stopped the idea of fighting with them. And they never took the next step to try to attack me. So this next thing is sort of insane because my wife told me, you're crazy for doing this. But I actually wrote a book about the Buddha. And one of the major things that happened to Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, was he sat beneath the Bodhi tree. And he just sat there, and Mara, who was the god of temptation, he sent in all kinds of things to tempt him. And then when that didn't work, he sent in this army of demons. And so I was really captivated by this story because I could relate to the demon part of it most of all. And all of these beings came in to attack him, but he sat in the middle way, which is just neutral, realizing what he is and that it's all an illusion. And they were unable to attack him. So I told my wife one day, I said, I'm going to invite every demon to come to me and see what they can do. And she said, you're crazy. Why would you do that? And I said, because I want to see if this is real for me. And so I did it. And all night long, they were coming and trying to get me. And I just sat in that middle way, knowing what I am, and it never unfolded. And then there was a very significant time when one of the demons was again in my bedroom, and it was coming to get me. And I was laying on my side looking at the door where it was, and I just had this feeling in my head of like I don't know, telepathic projection to it. And I don't even know where this thought came out of me. I told it, I said, I am death. Because I felt like it wanted to kill me. And I said, I am death. And it sort of stunned it. And it didn't know what to do. But I wasn't saying that out of it, like to make it afraid. I was just saying it because I said it because I realized that as much as I am life, I'm also death. It's all part of the process. And that it's an illusion. I mean, death is an illusion. Of course, the physical body dies and it decays, but that thing that is behind everything, that awareness, does not succumb to death. And it doesn't even partake in life. It just is. Mm. And so with that attitude, it changed everything for me in the situation of meeting these dark entities.
It sounds like, was that a sense of letting go in some ways? Once you're kind of accepting death, or maybe even in the face of this representing as death, then is that a sense of letting go and not needing to kind of go into this divisional?
Yeah, it's not just a sense of letting go, but it's an actual letting go. In other words, it's I guess maybe by analogy, you could say you can look at your hand and you can know that's your hand, right? You don't have to let go of the thought that it might not be your hand. You just know it. So it got to that point in my life where I just knew what I was. And so there was nothing to think about. There's nothing to put on a show for, nothing to convince the entity. It was just knowing what I am was enough. And I don't know whether you want me to go into the next phase of this.
Well, I'm interested in the entities themselves, and you said that some of them, so they all took a dark form, some of them were a vaporous mist, some of them took more
Mhm.
of a kind of humanoid form, and but they all seemed kind of dark in nature. Were there any that you met aside from the one when you were 12, when these two kind of Moorish type men came came to you? Were there any
Mhm.
that were not dark? So I'm interested in kind of the way that they look and whether
Right.
you feel that their nature really was dark or whether it was teaching you something.
I don't think that I've met another entity that people would think of as, let's say, a spirit guide or a some sort of inner master, something like that. I've always felt like I've been completely on my own. I've never seen the golden cord that's so common with out of body experiences. I've never seen that. Um, so I haven't. I've had a tremendous number of experiences by my calculation, anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 out of body experiences. So it's not like it was a one-off kind of a thing where I say, well, I didn't see it. I just have never seen it in all those experiences. Um, there have been experiences that I've had that are with uh, other people, but at the time when this happens, it's so real that I don't even consider it as being, another worldly being.
Mhm.
Like when I'm in that state of the out of body state, it's all real, in a way that this world is real. To influence or make a noise or do something where somebody who is in the physical world can hear me or see me.
Mm.
I remember this one time my wife and I went down to my parents' house for Thanksgiving, and I took a nap in the front room, and then I left my body and I came out into the living room, and I saw my father sitting on a chair watching TV, my mother in the kitchen, and I was up by the chandelier trying to hit the chandelier to make some noise. Um, and it had no effect. The only thing I could do was go over to the clock on the wall, stare at it, and go, okay, I still remember it was 3 minutes to 11, and try to remember everything happening in the room. So when I went back into my body, it could come out and tell everybody,
Yeah, yeah.
which I did. And my father just sort of had this expression of, well, I don't know. So
Yeah.
it didn't do any good.
I was wondering about that, how your parents responded to you. So, do you remember the first time you left your body as a child?
I don't remember the first time. The only thing I know is that by age 6, it was a comfortable thing. Like it wasn't a frightening thing.
Mm.
Um, I think at a couple of points I had that paralysis that people talk about, where the whole body can't move and you feel like you're stuck in it. And I had that, and that was sort of scary, but I just relaxed into it, and it just subsided, and then I left my body. Um, but I can think of one interesting thing that happened probably about 15 or 20 years ago. I was out of my body and I was in some neighborhood that I never had seen before. And I was approaching a house that had one light in the living room on. And it was very late at night. And there was a tree on the side of the house. And as I was nearing the house, I could see an old man in the window wearing glasses, sort of balding. watching TV, and I went up to the window and I looked at him, and then I went into the house, and he turned and looked at me, and I suddenly realized why I was there. I told him it's time to go, and he looked at me and he sort of, you know, he didn't say anything, but he felt it. He knew what I was saying, and I took him to the afterlife. Now that was an odd experience because I didn't feel like I was me, and I don't know why I was doing that. And so I've had experiences like that where I seem to be embodying some other being or person, or I'm not myself, or what I essentially am embodies various beings. Um, Again, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's something that is, I guess, unusual because we have this identity, generally speaking, that we are this one person, and that travels into other worlds. And so I've listened to a number of these near-death experiencers, and even though they're having this near-death experience, they're still what they are in the waking state. They're still the same person with the same identities. Um, and so that's like something that continues on. But for me, there have been times when I haven't been me. I don't know who I was, and I'm sort of on a mission, and I don't know why.
It's, I mean, in that case, you're kind of embodying, well, embodying is not the right word, but a psychopomp. You know, you're taking on the role of a psychopomp in some respects with that man. And but it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look back to what was happening with your son and then your daughter, I was wondering, you know, what was going on in your life at the time, and whether this kind of strengthening, there's two things to think about, really. What was going on in your life at the time, and then also on a kind of spiritual level, were you in practice for something? As in, if it is true that if we make ourselves available for this work, which it sounds like that's the case with you, you've committed your life to the study of this, you know, in your own experiences, together with your wife, I might add, because you met
Mhm.
in your early 20s, and then, you know, she was also interested, Janice, and you've kind of had this really beautiful relationship where you've gone off exploring around the world together, you know, inwardly as well as outwardly,
Mhm.
you know, seeking teachers together, and then experimenting and, you know, trying things out. So I really loved reading about that in your book. But you know, you've committed your life to this, the exploration of this. And I just wonder whether this expansion was teaching you to kind of exercise those muscles and build those muscles up in order for you to be prepared for what you were going to be doing next. I don't know what you think about that.
Mhm. Um, I when I was young in college, I by the time I was in college, I never thought a lot about out of body experiences. They were just part of my life, and I never talked to anybody about them. I never told my parents about them. I never talked about them, and I shared a room with my brother, older brother, and it wasn't until about 5 years ago that he told me he had all these experiences too. So here we were in the same room,
Wow.
and he was having them and I was having them, but it wasn't until we're in our 60s before we talked about it.
Oh,
Um, so when I got to college and I met Janice, we hit it off right away. And we got into these discussions. Um, she was reading a book by, I think it was an author named Taylor Caldwell. I don't remember exactly if it was about reincarnation or what it was about. But she was telling me about it. And then I told her, well, I've had out of body experiences, and she had read all about them, but she hadn't had them.
Mm.
And so that was the first time I ever talked about it, because I didn't even know what they were. I just thought it was like this dimension of my life. And so I never mentioned them. I have to say, one time, this was a very interesting experience. Um, Much later, I'm guessing I was in my maybe my mid 30s. Um, One night, I had an out of body experience, and I was going to, I went to this area that was much like a public courthouse, where it had these steps all the way up to the entrance, which had the big columns like this, I guess, architectural design like old Greece that you see on all of these courthouses and public buildings. And there was a young boy playing with a ball on the steps, a lot of people walking in and out. This is an out of body experience. And I was playing with him with the ball. And then after about 10 minutes of this, I found myself back in my bedroom, standing at the side of the bed, looking at my body and my wife sleeping in the bed. And next to me was this little boy who was in the out of body experience. So somehow he traveled with me. And we're standing at the edge of the bed. And my wife wakes up and looks at me. And she's staring at me in disbelief. And the next thing I knew is she's pushing my body, wake up, wake up, wake up. And I woke up and she said, I just saw you at the side of the bed. And I said, okay, was anyone else there? And she said, yes, this little boy. And she described the little boy exactly. And that was the first time I can think of that somebody exterior to the experience saw me.
Mm.
And I said to her, this is probably about 4 a.m. I said, go back to sleep. I'm going to project out again. And so she went back to sleep, and I rested, and I projected myself out at the foot of the bed this time. And again, she woke up, and and she was rubbing her eyes like she can't believe this. And I was pointing, it's me, it's me, it's me. She couldn't hear me, but she could see all of my gestures. And so that was a cool experience, and just in terms of being able to validate it from the outside. But as I'm talking, I just remembered this other thing that happened, um, that I'm pretty sure I did write in detail in the book, with a dark entity. This was my daughter was in New York and going through a rough period, and she went into a church, a Catholic church, and when she left, she felt very strange. And when she flew back home to Colorado, she looked in the mirror and she could see the face of somebody that was not her face. And she felt something is way off. And so she called me and she said, something's not right. I see this other face instead of my face in the mirror. I feel like there's something uh, inside of me. And so I was in my living room across town. She was, I guess, south of me by about an hour. And so I said, I'm going to sit here in meditation and see what I can do. And so I went into meditation, and I projected myself to her house, and I could see her lying on the sofa, and I floated above her, and I could see a sorceress inside of her. And I think this is the most powerful being I ever met. It was very resistant and really wanted to stay there. And I went back into that feeling of, there's nothing you can do to me. You have to leave. And she was really resistant, got more and more. It was almost like a Disney movie, like something very vicious. And I pulled the entity out of the body and I got rid of her. And then I flooded the house that she was in with white light so that I could feel the light. And then it felt like just like that. You could feel the heat of it, not just the light itself. And then I don't know where I got this from. I stationed two angels to stand as sentinels in that house to make sure nothing else happened. But I ordered them to be there. And that also was strange to me. It's like I basically reprimanded them and I said, do your job and stay here. And I don't know where that came from, but I left. And then I didn't call my daughter because I didn't know whether it was real or not, just in my imagination. So a half hour later, she called me and she said, I don't know if you were here, but everything has changed. I ran to the mirror. I didn't see anything looking back at me except myself, and it's gone. And so that was a dark entity, but it was not in the form of these like black, um, wispy things or a literally dark entity. It was like I don't know what you would call it, an entity with a dark presence, but it was the face of a woman, and I could see it was like a bluish purple face. And so it had taken a different form than the typical dark entity.
Did it look like a human or something?
Yes, it did look human.
It's very
Yeah.
interesting. And she'd encountered that in the church.
She didn't know what she encountered, but that's apparently where she picked it up.
Mm,
She just felt this heaviness in the church,
yeah.
and then that never left her.
It's really interesting for me to hear that, not only because in the book, it's not clear that she's your daughter. I remember reading that part.
No, I know. And
Yeah.
I know in telling this, I don't know what she's going to think about it, but
Yeah,
I didn't really want to say that.
sure.
So I used a different name than her real name.
Of course.
Um,
But
but yeah, because she was so close to me that I felt, okay, I'm going to do this.
course. And so that it kind of gives it a different meaning in some ways, because now it's not only yourself and your brother, but also your daughter who have this kind of sensitivity. And I really want to ask, you know, do you know about your ancestry? I know you said that you saw your great grandfather, he appeared at one point. Your father seems to kind of not be too interested in these worlds, or at least on the surface to you. But I just wonder if you know much about your ancestry and possibly.
No, no, I don't know much about it because I am a second generation American. So my family uh, comes from the Ukraine, essentially. And the history was just so poor. There's nothing I can find out about it. Um, However, my wife and I often said, "Well, where do you think this comes from?" Because it tends to run in the family, doesn't it?
It sometimes it
Um,
seems to. It seems to.
yeah.
We can't say for sure, but certainly there seems to be a, an ability or something, a propensity of some kind that runs through family blood. And I see it in myself. And I see it with many, many of my guests. So it's something that I
Mhm.
think is really interesting. It's not a very popular line of thought for people, line of study, because, a lot of people think that might be problematic, but it is what it is. And we see these patterns again and again. So it's, I don't know whether you've looked into Ukrainian, or kind of Slavic folklore,
Mhm.
but that could be a line of inquiry.
Yeah. I think that it's probably in every culture around the world,
Yeah.
just from generally reading about it, right?
Mm.
I was particularly interested because of you in Irish folklore. The ideas of these otherworldly beings and these otherworldly encounters are everywhere, and I know that you had yours. I really haven't had them in the physical world. Like I'll see something once in a while. I'll have them in this in between world, but not like seeing. Like I know people who actually like my daughter sees beings all the time while she's in the physical world. But we were mentioning the idea of like running back in the family. My father, who never talked about these things, and he just didn't seem to care. If I go back and think of things that he's mentioned to me, I say, well, maybe this whole thing sort of stems from him, because when he was about 10 years old, he told me this story once. When he was about 10 years old, he was sitting on this large stone uh, on a very slow running river, and he fell in the water, and he was underwater drowning. And he looked up, and a hand came through the water, grabbed him, and pulled him out. The next thing he knew, he was sitting on the rock again. There was no one near him, no being around him. And so that was a very, you know, different experience, otherworldly experience, I would say. And then at one point, this must have been in the late 80s, he told me that he woke up and there was a 7 or 8 foot dark being at the foot of his bed. And that to me sounds a lot more like the dark man that you talk about. Um, and then my daughter, this is like within two weeks ago, I would say, she took her dog out for a walk early in the morning. She wakes up very early to start working. So I'm thinking it's about 4 in the morning. She looked out over the parking lot of the apartment complex where she lives, and she saw this dark man walk from one end to the other. She said it was about 7 or 8 feet tall. It had no features. It was just a dark, it wasn't menacing. It just walked from one end to the other, and she watched it, and it disappeared into thin air. And I don't know what that is. I can't say. So I'm curious as to whether anyone really knows what it is, or whether it's interdimensional and you just happen to catch it, at a certain place in time where the maybe the wall between this reality and another dissipates to some degree.
It's fascinating to ponder, isn't it? This section is available on the full-length version on Patreon. Vic Shane discusses the influence of Joseph Campbell's concept of the hero's journey. He shares a dream experience which helped him realize that everything he sees is actually part of himself. And significantly, he describes an out-of-body experience where he is confronted by a large dark entity and transformed it through his own love and understanding in relationship to it. Come and join us on Patreon for this and hundreds of hours of exclusive content, in-depth discussion, and online events. So thank you very much for
Thank you.
sharing it with me. And as I say, I really enjoyed your book. So you talk about that here, and I will link this. And I just wonder, what do you have any kind of plan going forward for what you're going to be doing? Do you work with people using these ideas, or?
I actually was going to start a group. My wife is a therapist and a hypnotherapist, and so she started a couple of groups, and it's going real well. And I was thinking about just starting a group for people who really want to know who they are. And so I was just formulating this idea, and then I texted a friend the other day who I said, what do you think of this? And he said, wow, I think that's great. So I may do that. I'll keep writing. I think I just write because that's what I've always done. Um, my first degree was in journalism, and I'm a writer. So
Yeah.
I can't help that these ideas just pour out, and I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. So uh, yeah, I just keep writing, and hopefully it just hits somebody at where they are and what appeals to them, and they get it. There's so many ways you can say or write something, and one thing will hit for somebody. And if it does, then I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you then. So what kind of form will this take? Will it be kind of an online thing or an online community or
Well, I thought of that. I was going to do it in person, let's say maybe on a Sunday morning, and just have people come in and leave their beliefs and their suppositions and their ideas, just leave them at the door and just start from scratch to just try to pare everything down, and then take a look at this ego self and how it's the cause of all the problems and what is it and what's contained within it. And that's the most difficult thing, because you just express this struggle. It's a constant struggle. How do I get back to this great feeling? Well, that's what's in the way. We've been so inculcated, habituated to thinking in one way, that our entire perspective of what reality is looking in one way. And the most difficult thing is to turn the attention away from the objective world and put it back where that awareness is. If you do it enough, eventually it breaks down and disappears. The ego disappears, you know, and it will happen spontaneously. Um, like when you're, let's say, the peak performance in sports is talked about. Somebody is running and there's a race, and they're not thinking about themselves. They're just totally focused on the event. Or, what you were talking about, where you're not trying um, to see the oneness in everything. You're just out in the ocean and it just happens. It's because if we can let that ego just drop down, you can even when it's gone, you can still, the thoughts still come. They arise out of consciousness, but they're out there. They're not back here where everything is seen from. So I just want to show people that turning the attention constantly back to the source eventually erodes the ego. It makes life a lot easier. Even though you run through difficulties anyway, it's still now in perspective of what's real and what's not real. And in that world out there, so to speak, is where everything happens and everyone's so concerned. Money is so important, and um, impressing others, or getting stuff, or competing. That all happens out there, but what's going on back here that never changes? Let's try to get in touch with that and see what that is.
I love that. I mean, that is the message that we're given, everywhere we look, whether it's school, whether it's, social media, how we are told to kind of live our lives, get your career, do this, do this, do this, gaining towards what, that we need money, that we need, and yeah, I love what you have in mind. So thank you very much, Vic. It's really, really lovely to meet you. And how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way for people to contact you if they wanted to?
Well, I guess the best way is to first maybe pick up one of my books and read it. Um, I seem to be all over the internet for some reason. I guess it's just information spreads. Um, and I did have a website. I think I was in the middle of having somebody update it, vicshane.com. And you can email me through that, or Shayne mindbody at gmail.com.
Lovely. That's great. I'll pop it up here too. And
Okay.
yeah, keep us posted with what you're going to be doing then. And yeah, it's a real pleasure. And I understand that you'll be having a chat with Darragh too on Spirit Box
Yes.
podcast at some point.
Yes.
So I look forward to that too. And I know Darragh will have some great, ideas about your experiences too. So I look forward to that. So yeah,
Okay.
have a lovely.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I'm your number one fan, I have to say.
Oh, wow.
You just do tremendous work and your sincerity comes through. And so I
Oh,
hope you keep doing what you're doing.
thank you very much. That's really.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider joining us on Patreon for dozens more episodes of unreleased bonus content, monthly online events, and a private chat. We are a warm, supportive community, and it really helps to support the project. Find us on patreon.com/the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast.
SpectreVision Radio.